Welcome back to the Major League Gaming HoTS Room exhibition matches. We're currently doing some King of the Hill here. We just saw Crank defeat Katz pretty convincingly. Katz put up a good fight. He had a great match with that draw play, but Crank just answered it so soundly. Won with the counterattack. I'm here with totalbiscuit as my co-commentator, and we're about to get this next game started. It's going to be Lomo, a Terran player. How do you think he'll fare against Crank, totalbiscuit?
Well, let me put it this way. Crank is practicing in a house of Terran. He is currently living in a house with MMA, Hart, and Ryung. So those guys don't really play a huge amount of HoTS, if I'm totally honest. Ryung particularly is very focused on GSL stuff and things like that. So it's that he's had a decent amount of practice against Terran, but I certainly wouldn't call it his best matchup. It definitely wasn't in Wings of Liberty either. So, yeah, there's all to play for here. And I'll tell you this, what we noticed in the House of the Swarm tournament is that Crank consistently fell down to Widow Mines over and over again. In fact, it's something that a lot of pro gamers don't seem to have fully grasped how to deal with yet. And the Widow Mine, when used properly, is extremely potent.
It seems to be that way for me. Like every time I play HoTS Swarm, the Widow Mines seem really powerful, but when we've been doing these show matches and the King of the Hill, I actually haven't seen very many Terrans use them very much. Sometimes like one or two is part of an early game rush, and then they say, that's it, they didn't work, I'm not using them for the rest of the game. Do you think that maybe is an oversight?
It is absolutely an oversight, and the reason that I say this is because I saw Ryung using the ridiculous effect when we did all these show matches. As in, he would be building 20 plus of these things. He would be using the Burrowing Claws upgrade, or whatever the hell it's called. I can't even remember. They keep changing it all the time.
Drilling Claws, I think.
Drilling Claws, yes. The ability to burrow in 1 second, which means you can actively use them in fights. Not only that, but it means you can easily flank with them, you can drop them, you can put them behind the army to cut off their retreat. They are ridiculously powerful, and at the moment, they are being overlooked by a lot of gamers. So I would suggest to anyone that's trying to take on Crank today, try a few Widow Mines. You never know. It might very well work out. In fact, try more than a few.
If a few doesn't work, come back with twice as many. Yep. Keep doubling it up every attack, and eventually he'll probably succumb.
It's very difficult to have an inefficient Widow Mine. You know, there's some people, I believe it's Mr. Bitter that always says you can't have an inefficient Reaper or an inefficient Hellion. You definitely can't have an inefficient Widow Mine.
Seems to be a theme among Terran units, but let's introduce these players here. Our defending champion at the bottom right location of the map is going to be Crank from Axiom. Already has 1 victory under his belt.
And his opponent up to the northwest in the blue trunks playing Terran. He goes by the name of Lomo.
So how will Lomo do this? Will he take our advice, use the Widow Mines? You know, one other thing I haven't seen many Terrans using, but I think it could be very effective, is the new Battle Hellion. Integrating that into either a timing push off 1 or 2 base, or even your late game play. Now that you no longer need to get the Blue Flame upgrade, it kind of starts with that. It's very effective results, and I think its attribute that's most overlooked is its ability to tank damage.
Yes.
It's got the life of a Marauder, but it's cheaper, can be produced out of a reactor, and doesn't have the armored classification, so Stalkers and Immortals do less damage to it.
Indeed. They've also made a recent change to the way that the cone works, if I recall correctly. The problem with it used to be that it was really not very good against charging Zealots, but it was really good against Zerglings. But the thing is, Hellions are already good against Zerglings, so it's kind of redundant. So what they did was they changed the way that the Cone of Fire actually works, so that it is now more effective against Zealots. So we may very well see the use of that. I'm still not entirely convinced about full mech play versus Protoss in Heart of the Swarm, but there is a lot to look at, really. And there are still many changes to be made, I imagine, before they release. So strategies are still very much in a state of flux. We'll see if Lomo decides to pull anything like that out.
And, you know, I think what they're doing with a lot of these changes, they're making it more viable to go bio and mech at the same time.
Yeah.
With the siege mode, like not having to research that, means it's much easier to integrate just a couple tanks into your play because you don't have to pay that siege mode cost. You can just get 1 or 2 to be safe, or 1 or 2 maybe just to force the Protoss to engage you on the ground of your choice, using that superior range. And same thing with Battle Hellions not needing the Blue Flame upgrade.
Yeah.
Much easier to just add in a few of those.
Definitely. Interesting decision by Lomo there not to exploit the fact, of course, that Reapers can now be built without a tech lab. And it still costs 50 gas, so there's an assumption that every Terran and their mother is going to go straight into a Reaper early on, because it is essentially a scouting unit that is very hard to stop at that stage. But honestly, there are also some players that say, you know what, I want to spend that 50 gas on something else. In his instance, he goes straight for a reactor and then is going for a factory as well. Now, these are not necessarily lined up, so we may not see a swap over here.
You know, I would be really interested to see if he reactors out a bunch of Marines, then gets some Widow Mines, and does some weird thing where, you know, normally if you push with like 7 Marines, there's like 2 Stalkers that'll just kite them forever and you'll just lose all your Marines. But what if you use the Marine just as a distraction to get the Widow Mines into the mineral line before the Protoss has detection, or even just to zone out the Stalkers while your Marines can work on that expansion?
Yeah, that's a Total Biscuit build. I made that. Well,
nice.
I'm sure other people did as well, and probably do it a lot better than me, but it's actually a build that I did try, and I sort of theorized it on my stream, and it does work. You can go for kind of a 4 Marine, maybe even up to 6, 7 Marine, and a couple of Widow Mine push, and it works pretty well. You know, the Zealot almost gets under there. That would have been a little unfortunate, but yeah, that's now gone down, and a little bit of aggression coming in from Crank, who is just picking away at Marines up to the top there with his Stalker. He is going to go Hellion here, interestingly enough.
I actually kind of like it as a reaction to seeing Crank push out these units. Because of the damage he's put onto him, if you can get 4 Hellions and run those units down before they get back to their base, you could just take 2 free unit kills off the bat, right?
Yeah, that would be pretty fantastic. And then he's going to switch it over to Widow Mine. So this is a little bit of a combo push. He's got Marines, Hellions, and Widow Mine. And just including those Widow Mines early on is pretty wonderful. It has a tendency to force, of course, detection of any sort out because it becomes an absolute nightmare to deal with otherwise. And as you note, on the Mothership core right now, the ability it used to have, whereby it could actually be essentially a giant scanner for hidden units, it's not there anymore.
Yeah, they moved that ability over to the Oracle. It does have the Time Warp ability now.
Yep.
So I mean that I guess, you know, that could be used against Widow Mines if they're trying to run by you. It still has some value, but it would be much nicer to be able to see them, of course. That's always a big advantage. So the Protoss does have to either get that robotics or the Stargate for detection. It looks like Crank's gonna go for the robotics.
Yeah, that sounds pretty sensible at the moment. Crank does have a solid lead here by being on a Nexus. The question is, can he do anything about these Widow Mines? He actually can't take that out, so he's going to get hit by both of them. As you can see, you know, that's an example of the Widow Mine in action right there. And he also, I really like this move by Lomo, he baited a Photon Overcharge. That's a huge amount of energy being used, and as you can see, what Lomo did was he just pulled back. He didn't really have a huge amount of intention to really do much there. And there's now 2 Widow Mines there that need to be spotted by a observer in order to actually get out of there. And there's more Widow Mines on the way, plus a medevac. So all sorts of possibilities for shenanigans coming in here.
Even if those Widow Mines are killed, they've already paid for themselves. Like you mentioned, there's no cost-inefficient Widow Mine. Just a Zealot and Stalker kill already costs more than those 2 Widow Mines.
Yep.
And the Photon Overcharge point you made is so good, especially because he's going for this Hellion drop. And one of the counters to the Hellion drop is you want to use that Photon Overcharge, but now he can't do that anymore. In fact, he's actually moving the Widow Mines even closer to the base. It's going to get them burrowed.
That's a really nice move. He can get them burrowed. That's going to trigger, and it hits a few of those probes as well, and the Hellions then go in. That's so good a move by Lomo. That is really good. He gets out with most of them, and that was a fantastic trade. He's killed 13 workers already. That worked really well for him.
It's kind of deceiving because it looked like Crank did everything right there. He held that pretty well. Perhaps maybe he shouldn't have used that Photon Overcharge in the first situation, but again, maybe he had to because he didn't have the units, because he lost his Elden Stalker, right? All he had was like 2 sentries and there was a couple of Hellions running at him. That would have been really scary to deal with without that overcharge.
Yeah, certainly. I think that he probably could have held off and allowed the Hellions to actually move into the middle line before using the overcharge. I think perhaps it was a little
and then
too
killing
soon.
them with it.
Yeah, exactly. Because then, you know, they couldn't have escaped really. I mean, they would have lost at least one with a force field. They would have probably all died there. But it was a nice move by Lomo. He did that on purpose, clearly, and it worked really, really well. Incoming attempted Widow Mine drop by the looks of it. Widow Mine and Hellion. That's a very dangerous drop, and that needs to be fended off immediately. So we've got to see good defense here coming in from Crank, who's already taken some damage. Lomo is now pushing forward with more Widow Mines and trying to contain his opponent, which will also allow him to expand behind it. However, there is a sneaky pylon down below the main base here.
He's got a pylon and observer at the front. Lomo does have that bunker and several Marines, so a single warping won't cause too many problems.
No,
It'll take a little while to build up enough forces. I think Crank's really focused on defense right now. That cannon in his main base, if he didn't have that, that drop could have done so much damage to the 2 Hellions. I mean, the 2 Hellions were almost dead, but you know what? They still do full damage, even being almost dead, and they can kill a lot of probes.
Another photon overcharge went off as well and didn't really do a huge amount, so yeah, that's a little bit concerning. He is sitting on enough chrono boost to sink a battleship here, so we'll see what he decides to do with that. He's also forgotten to... There we go, he's actually turned that gateway into a warp gate. Bear in mind, of course, it's like 8 a.m. there and he hasn't slept, so it's understandable. Little scout there just to have a look and see what's going on. Currently, things are looking pretty good for Lomo, who has a lot of Widow Mines. He is setting up a solid contain. He's also building I love this, building the missile turret to make it much more difficult for an observer to get nearby.
That is really cool. He has the Viking there too. This is a really well thought out kind of soft contain, and it's kind of nice because yeah, like it's possible to break, right? Like he could just walk in with, if he had Colossi and really good observer micro, he could chip away at it and eventually take down this contain. But he can just pick up and run away. And Widow Mines are fast, Vikings are fast, without blink. Oh, look at that, a couple Stalkers going down.
As I say, it's very hard to engage a large amount of Widow Mines. You've got to be very, very careful with how you do it. You've got to be very precise with your movement. If you can't directly see where they are, it's extremely difficult to deal with. Another one now moving in here, and honestly, one Stalker does not have the DPS to actually knock a Widow Mine down. This is before Drilling Claws, yeah? Consider how crazy it is with Drilling Claws, how difficult it is to actually kill these things before that happens. So this is a kind of a huge deal, and prior to this, when the Mothership Core actually had that detection ability, things were a lot easier for Protoss, but that's the change of the balance. Now we have a warp in coming in, so aggression is going to actually bypass the contain completely.
Maybe looking, you know, I don't think he can break the bunker or the tanks, but what he can do is he can make sure that there's no third base, and he can also, what's very important, make sure that no more Widow Mines are added to this kind of soft contain.
Yeah, certainly. Another observer's going to get picked off here. I love the addition of these Vikings. Oh, that one actually manages to escape, which is definitely good news for Crank, but it's very, very difficult to deal with. He eats another Widow Mine shot, which is less than ideal. Got to be so careful. Another scan comes down from Lomo, who thinks, ooh, can I pick that off? No, I can't. So he's starting to chip away at the containment, and it looks like he's actually going to be able to take a third Nexus here.
He's got the probe set up, the 2 Stalkers defending it. Oh, the Hellions have found his warp in. Stalkers are there to save the Zealots, but the gig is up now. Now he knows that there's some units outside of his base.
Yeah, and we also have siege tanks now in place, so this is going to be very, very difficult to deal with. He hasn't managed to get an observer or any flying unit out of there, so he can't blink into the main to bypass this siege tank line because he's dedicating all of his observers to try to clean up this Widow Mine contain. So it's pretty good, but the question is, what is Lomo's follow-up here? He's still sitting on 2 bases. We've got Crank just picks up his 3rd base. He's about to have 3-3. Lomo actually doesn't have any upgrades. So in a straight-up fight, Lomo is going to get flattened.
He will. I mean, it's going to come down to tank positioning. I think if he has his tanks pre-sieged, he should be okay, as long as there's enough Widow Mines to prevent the Stalkers from totally just blinking in and taking those tanks out. I feel like it's hard, you know, saying what is his plan? Could it be just to try to delay Crank's third and then do this massive 2-base timing?
Possibly, yeah, but the problem is he hasn't managed to delay that third all that much, really, and now we've got this big charge in. I don't know how successful this is necessarily going to be, but the Blink Micro is really, really good. Those tanks are unsieged, which is not the worst idea. They've still got really good damage, but the problem is that then that's where the armor upgrades really come into play for the Protoss player, and he does get pushed back, but a ton of SCVs pulled off the line. Medevac is shot down in a blaze of glory, and we've got the contain cleared up, and the third established here. So if Lomo is going to do a big timing to hit that 3rd base, he's got to do it sooner rather than later. 3-3's about to kick in, and it looks like he's not going to do that at all. He's just going to expand to a 3rd base of his own.
You know, he just finished at Armory a second ago. He's just started the 1st upgrade. Normally, if you're 0-0 versus 3-3, if you're going Bile, you might as well lead the game. There's nothing you can do. But at least going mech, your damage of units is so high that it still is very bad to be behind upgrades, but it's not an automatic loss.
Yeah, Siege does very much bypass a lot of upgrades because of how hard it hits. Unsieged tanks less so for obvious reasons, because of course that the amount of damage that's taken away from that is a flat rate. Oh, sorry. So you're thinking about AoE with big damage versus fast-firing low damage. So obviously armor upgrades are always going to win the day there. But right now he's sieged on his 3rd base, and what reason does he have to move out? Well, quite frankly, he doesn't. It's 3 base versus 3 base. He does have a slight harvester advantage in the form of mules as well as 6 more. But the question is, can he actually hold out with an army like this against an attack from Crank? With this many Widow Mines, there's a very big possibility that it could do a huge amount of damage to this army before it even hits.
I think in a defensive posture, there's no way Crank can break this army right here. No. At least unless he gets massively head in supply. The flip coin is, though, because the Widow Mines, he doesn't have the drilling cause upgrade yet, I don't think, unless I missed him. No, he doesn't have it quite yet.
He doesn't.
And the siege mode, of course, takes a while to set up. If he's caught moving around with this army, he'll get decimated before he can really get off many strikes.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way to exploit this build here from Lomo is very clearly to attempt Warp Prism Harass, in my opinion. The ability to jump in with Zealots into the main, into the natural very quickly is a good idea. There's also the possibility of Carrier Tempest as a big transition, because it will completely shut down the large defensive playstyle. With the range of both, the Widow Mines are very ineffective, and of course tanks have no answer to those kind of things whatsoever. It
looks like Crank is getting the War Person speed upgrade, I believe. And now he's even getting the Observer speed upgrade, too, which I love to see to help deal with those Widow Mines. So he is going to do that War Prism harassment like you're mentioning, and there's really no missile turrets to, to fend off those War Prisms. Typically, a Terran turret wants to get at least a couple to make it a little more difficult to get those in there. It looks like Lomo, though, instead of building his turreting defense, he's gonna push out and try to do some 3-base aggression here. He does have a nice amount of food to back him up.
Well, he doesn't have Drilling Claws, which is what I really don't like about this, because if he had Drilling Claws, the possibility of that many Widow Mines getting into the center of that big Doom mass is almost assured, yeah? So you can do so much damage if you manage to do that. Burrow in the middle of it, and the Colossus aren't fast enough to get away. They take big hits. The Sentries usually die to that as well. So that could be a big deal. So it's an upgrade that I feel he should consider investing in at this point. But in a straight-up fight, then I would say Crank, wins pretty much 100% of the time just because of that massive upgrade advantage. But supply-wise, he is behind, and Lomo is doing a great job of deflecting any attempted aggression that's coming in here from Crank.
Crank's now trying to get some warp in. Some on the left side of the map, Dark Templar there. Zealots over the top. Blinkstalker is trying to be annoying to the army to keep his attention focused in the middle of the map. Crank's really trying to spread him out there, abusing the mobility advantage that he has.
Certainly, and actually it looks like they're going to run right through to the main, bypassing that missile turret, and that's going to get out of the way of the tanks as well. He's way too fast for that. There are, however, Battle Hellions in position to try and deal with this, but there's a split. They've gone straight into the main base. The supply depot was not raised, and this could get a little bit messy, but honestly, there's not actually that many SCVs to kill there. Here comes the big engagement against that Widow Mine force, and, well, you can see how well that tends to work.
Crank was very effective at spreading out these Dark Templar just about everywhere. Lomo a little bit slow in lifting the depot. He is going to finally clear this up, I think. Only one Dark Templar left, but what it's done is it's bought Crank a lot of time against that 200 food mech army that Lomo was trying to threaten him with. And all this time, Crank's been on 4 bases, right? He unfortunately hasn't quite started mining these gases yet, although he's got plenty of resources. He's not too worried about that.
Yeah, he's taking a ton of gas.
Is he going to go for this Tempest transition you were talking about? It doesn't look like he's aiming for that quite yet.
No, it doesn't look like he's preparing for that at the moment at all, so he's going to focus mainly on the ground army, of course. He does have that War Prism now moving in, and it was the correct course of action to try and spread Lomo apart. Lomo reacted to it very well, I feel, and he was able to shut it down before it did too much damage. It killed workers, but in reality, they were workers that were in the main anyway and weren't actually mining all that much. A lot of them were just kind of idling around, so it's really not that big a deal. But as I said, he did deal with it quite well. There is the Warp Prism. And, Lomo actually hasn't changed over to the right firing mode. He could have actually killed that Warp Prism if he decided to change to the high-impact payload on the Thors.
Definitely more effective against Warp Prisms. Not too useful in general, but that was one circumstance where it was.
Got to the 4th base.
Oh, a nice DT warp in. And he's not scanning. There goes the scan.
Yeah, there's the scan coming down. There comes the army. So there's definitely some damage being done here. A lot of probes going down. Big warping comes in. A huge Widow Mine placement there. Fires off all over the place, but it wasn't that efficient at all. And, wow, Crank just ran all over Lomo's army there. And it only actually killed about 7 probes, and the Nexus stayed up. So that, I would not say, was all that efficient in engagement.
It wasn't. I think you've got to have the tanks behind the Widow Mines. What was critical there is Crank also was able to kill like 2 or 3 of the siege tanks with his Dark Templar before the battle even started, and that took out just so much of Lomo's damage potential.
Oh, great positioning there by Lomo, actually, on the third base defense against those charging zealots. It could not have been better. Oh, but a cancel on the armory. The +2 armor is cancelled seconds before completion with a massive DT warping into the main. +3 DTs obliterate pretty much everything, and he's starting to smash his way through here. Another scan's going to be forced. Battle Hellions are not bad against DTs, as you can see, and they're going to be able to take most of them down, but this is unfortunate for Lomo. He's starting to get picked apart here.
Oh, and a scanner is away. 1 Dark Templar still in the main damage. Another massive warping. This is where Cranks can really exercise his economic muscles here and just try to keep trading units and eventually just overrun Lomo by this mass warping mechanic Protoss has in the late game.
And it's working really, really well. A nice cancel there by Lomo, able to shut down that war presence before the next wave comes in. But that big army is now coming in. There is, as you can see, the 4 force, but that is no match for an army of that size. The Archons obliterate them without any problems at all. Plus the +2 shield upgrade is very much helping here. The upgrade advantage is massive in favor of Crank right now, and there is the GG.
Well, you know, Crank had to work for that one, though. Lomo really, really put him through the loops. That opening soft contain was just so cool with the...
It's brilliant.
Yeah, the Widowmine missile turret, Viking, and he even had an SCV there. So, because the Vikings would get hurt, right? Because they kill observers, they get shot, but they just repair them. The Widowmines would get hurt because the Stalkers would get a couple shots off before the observer dies. He just repair them.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and it also allows you to build that missile turret, which means that you have that additional detection range. I mean, it's not even for shooting down the observer, it's for spotting it, because detection range on a missile turret is obviously larger than its actual attack range, so it makes it much easier to pick off observers without having to waste scans, which gives you this wonderful economic advantage. And, you know, I said it several times, that is kind of his weakness. Yeah? He's not so great against dealing with Widowmine. Now, I have a report, by the way, that Rotterdam really wants to play, and he's actually in the chat by the name of Novosibirsk or something like that.
Okay, we'll get Roddy in at the as the next challenger, most likely. See if he can take on Crank. One question I want to ask you before we go on a quick break is, given the fact that contain was so effective at keeping Crank contained to 2 bases for so long, you think you could combine that with, instead of just building up a bunch of tanks, like maybe a mass expansion behind it type play?
I think so. In fact, that's what I do. Not that that's any advice at all. But yeah, if you have a contain, what's the best way to take advantage of that? Yeah, it's to try and get a base ahead of your opponent. When they finally break it, they run up. It's like, oh, he's on 3 bases and he's suddenly got way more units than I do. So I can't. My counterattack is going to get blunted. And once that happens, then you have map control, and it allows you to deny the third. At which point you can just hammer your opponent.
It definitely seems like something that should be looked into more. I hope more Terrans are going to be looking at that game, and also with the ones that Ryung was playing, and trying to experiment more with all the different utilizations of the Widowmine, and especially combine them with the medevac. It didn't work that game because of the cannon, but combining the afterburner's ability to get in there fast, and maybe even get in there before probes can start running. Drilling claws so they burrow quickly, so the probes have even less time to run away. Yep. There's so many potential uses. It just makes me excited to see how the Storm really coming around, and I'm really excited for the release date of it, actually. Yeah,
I mean, Widowmines are a way more exciting unit than people give them credit for, in my opinion. I think there were, later on in the game, Lomo made 2 key mistakes with them. One was massing them in an inefficient ball, which was it was easy to know where that was. If he'd split the Widowmine force in 2, he could have had a much better surface area to attack with. He could have actually snuck a few around the back of the army, burrowed them there. And secondly, he didn't research drilling claws, which would have allowed him to burrow right in the center of the army. And you can go in there with about 10 Widowmines if you get picked off, but the rest of them manage to burrow and then gut the force completely. So that's something that I think any Terran player needs to consider if they're going to build that many Widowmines.
Widowmine flanks, almost how we saw Spider Mines used in Brood War.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's all. If you want to use Widowmines well, watch those Brood War games, especially I think Fantasy is probably most known for Spider-Man usage, and see how those guys used it back then, because they were true masters. But anyways, let's take a quick break, and we'll get back with our new challenger is going to be Rotterdam versus Crank, coming up soon.